Welcome to Gnostic Warrior Radio Show and Podcast, broadcasting from GnosticWarrior.com in San Diego, California, to around the world. I'm your host, Mo, and today we have the pleasure of having a discussion with Mark Passio of WhatOnEarthIsHappening.com. Mark is an independent researcher and teacher. Since 2008, Mark has educated people around the world with his incredible wealth of knowledge. It's a great pleasure to have him today on the podcast. How you doing today, Mark?
I'm doing well, Mo. Thanks so much for inviting me onto your show.
Great. I appreciate you agreeing to be a guest. I've been watching and listening to a lot of your podcast over the years, so it's great to finally have a discussion with you.
It's great to be here.
Great. What I would like to do, Mark, in the beginning of my podcast with my guest is go over your background a little bit before you started your venture now, which is WhatOnEarthIsHappening.com, which you have several writings that you've done and articles, and of course your podcast that you've been doing over the years, and then I know you're doing conferences as well. But before we get into that, let's touch on what you were doing before all that. Where did you grow up? Kind of give us some background on that.
Sure. I grew up in South Philadelphia, and I guess you could say I had a typical South Philadelphia upbringing. Philadelphia is on the east coast of the United States, on the east coast of the state of Pennsylvania, on the east coast of the U.S., and the family that I was born into is kind of, I guess you could say, an average Catholic Italian-American family that really didn't question things very much. They're not really free thinkers. They're just kind of the typical go along to get along type average American family. I wouldn't say that they're highly religious, but they just bought religion hook, line, and sinker and took the attitude of, well, this is what we were taught, this is what we're going to teach our children, and that's just how you're supposed to think, and don't question it. So that's kind of like the mindset of the family that I was born into. In my own youth, I pretty much went along with that program as well and accepted without much questioning a lot of the religious dogma that was fed to me as a child. And when I would ask people, well, if I had a question about this, the answer would come back, well, that's just the way that it is, that's just what our beliefs are, and that's just what we're supposed to accept and believe, and that's it. So there was never any kind of an encouragement to think outside of the box or outside of the cage at all. It was just put your head down, work hard, so you can, do the school work so you can eventually get a good job, so then you could work hard and make money, and that's what life is all about. And take these religious beliefs in addition to that and just accept those without much questioning either. So,
it's interesting, Mark, that you talk about that because you come from an Italian Catholic family, and I come from a French Catholic family, and it's basically the same.
Right.
And I would attribute that to just Catholicism, correct?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it is one of those religions that is really all about setting people up for acceptance of the world as it is, I would say. Instead of questioning things, thinking for oneself, and using our willpower to change the way things are, because if anybody hasn't been paying attention, the world pretty much needs to be changed from the way things are, because the way things are unacceptable.
Yeah, and that's a great way that you put it, Mark, is that it sets everybody else to kind of accept the status quo, and then, I feel our generation is the generation that won't accept it.
Exactly. We're starting to get to that point so far. It's an encouraging beginning. I'd say we have a long way to go, but at least we're on that path.
Yes, definitely. Continue.
Okay, so I would say it started in my late grade school years that I really began to question the dogmatic religious beliefs that I had been spoon-fed as a child. And it took a while. I mean, a lot of other people come out of this at earlier ages, but it was probably I would say, starting around when I was 12 years old. And at that time, I knew I was being lied to, but I lacked the knowledge of what organized religion really was. So I had no knowledge of astrotheology. I had no knowledge of the control system back then, and that ignorance at that time really turned the anger that I had about the religious indoctrination that I had been put through into burning hatred. So there was no channeling for those emotions, because perhaps if I had that knowledge, it could have helped put that religious indoctrination into perspective for me. But lacking that framework of awareness, the anger just built up and turned into blind hatred, raging hatred.
Yeah, and I could relate to you, Mark, because I grew up, as I said, in a French Catholic family, and the same anger came out of me, I'd say, around the same age, and I turned to punk rock.
Right.
And a lot of the things that I did, because of my lack of education about the system and the different control aspects of it, I actually turned it back on myself, and I was hurting myself, as opposed to being educated and knowledgeable about the world and the religions and so forth. And I feel if I was more educated and the authorities or the people, the powers that be, had told us more, I would have accepted more as opposed to rebelling.
Absolutely. It's all about that framework of knowledge. And again, hindsight is 20/20. So, if I would have known what I know now back then, maybe I wouldn't have gone down the path that I did. But in a strange way, maybe I wouldn't have changed anything either, because it allowed me to gain a perspective of what's really going on in the world and wake up to the extent that I have.
I agree.
So when all that anger was really building up, I decided that I was going to gravitate to the exact opposite of what I had been spoon-fed. I wanted to find the antithesis of the belief system into which I was born. And so I, decided I'm going to look into the darkest things that are out there. The things that that talk about the exact opposite, or want to put down religion, that want to eradicate it entirely. And that led me to become involved with the Satanic ideologies. So many people don't know what Satanism really is. When they hear Satanism, they have a connotative definition that is, floating around in their mind, but really it's usually nothing like what real Satanism actually is. So we can get into what Satanism is in a moment, but for now I'll just say that I became involved with Dark Occultism in general. And particularly, I found the writings of Anton LaVey and became involved in that ideology through his books. I also became involved to a lesser extent with the Temple of Set and the writings of Michael Aquino. And I began really to espouse the Satanic ideology through, my own expressions, through different mediums like writing articles, writing music. I was in bands at the time that put out the ideology through the lyrics of the band. And
Mark,
yes.
if you could please, for the listeners, in a simple sentence or a few sentences, describe exactly what Satanic ideology is. Because I feel, even though I wasn't a member of the Church of Satan, or I didn't prescribe to any of these ideologies, I was actually living that life,
Sure.
even though I didn't know I was. So
yes.
It'd be great if you can kind of give it, you're really good at doing that, if you can explain it in the most simple way possible.
That's a perfect lead way. And again, we could expand on this a lot later in the interview. But in brief, it is an ideology, a way of living. It's a way of life. Okay, it is a religion, because I'm using religion in the actual etymological term, in that religion is something that is there to hold one back or to bind one from forward progress. And what a false religion like Satanism is it's something that binds our progress in consciousness and holds us back from evolutionary progression in consciousness. So what the basic tenets of Satanism are are that self-preservation is the highest of all laws in the universe, and the self comes before everything else, including and most of all before truth. Okay? And whatever you need to do to come out on top, it's a social Darwinistic ideology of survival of the fittest, and the fittest is me. So it's the self as God, essentially.
Well,
pure
welcome
self.
to America.
Yes. And
welcome to America.
The second main tenet is moral relativism. The idea is that there is no such thing as objective right and wrong.
That would be sort of like the Crowley "Do Thou Wilt."
Actually, no, because that's very misunderstood. In Thelema, in the Thelemic tradition, "do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law" absolutely does not mean do whatever you want. It's the will, the true will in the Thelemic tradition is something entirely different than the selfish, egoic will. And we can get into that later if you want. But just to continue on with the main tenets, and we could expand on them later. Again, moral relativism, the idea there's no such thing as right and wrong. And then social Darwinism, which again is the most ruthless, should come out on top of the human pack, okay? And then eugenics, very much so espoused in the Satanic ideology, which is basically, controlling populations and doing that however you need to do it, even if it means culling populations. So deciding who's fit to breed, who gets to live, and who dies. That's the ultimate expression of where Satanism ultimately goes. This ideology, again, as you very accurately said, is really the ideology that's dominating the world and dominating people's thinking, even though they don't really know it or probably wouldn't admit it if they were pressed that, yes, this is how most people think.
Yeah, you basically describe America when you describe the ideologies, and when I look at the God of this world, if we were to really see who was in charge of the people's minds and their souls, it would be Satan, even though I know it's allegorical in nature. But, keep going on, Mark.
It's interesting. As a Hebrew word, the ancient word Satan in Hebrew, it meant the adversary or the oppositional force. It was the thing that would tear one apart from oneself from within. It was the oppositional force within the consciousness itself before it became anthropomorphized as an evil deity in the Christian tradition. But originally, that Satan represented a force that is within the individual that ultimately divides the individual against himself or herself. And the way that it does that is by setting the actions against the thoughts and the emotions. If there is contradiction there, we are not a being that as we think, so we feel, so we act. We may think and feel a certain way, but our actions will often betray our thoughts and emotions, and we'll do something that is not really in congruency with our thoughts and our emotions, hence internal opposition within the consciousness itself. That's what the original concept of Satan originally meant, that it was an oppositional force, and it came down in the Christian tradition as the adversary or the opposer of God, and hence was anthropomorphized.
Do you know where this original story had taken place? When I research, Satanism and Set, it goes back to Egypt. Would that be where it comes from?
Set was the adversary of the Egyptian solar deity Horus. Horus represented ultimately right action in the world, which was often represented as the light, the sun, and the rising sun coming up out of the tomb or of spiritual awareness, coming up out of the tomb of the night, where it went underneath into the underworld, on the side of the earth where we can't see the sun and where the light is blocked out, and hence there is darkness. Well, this was allegorically represented by Horus as the rising sun on the eastern horizon coming up during the day as the golden falcon. And this represented a rebirth, not only of the world through a new day and sunlight rejuvenating the planet, but it represented the rebirth of morality. Horus ultimately represented right action in consciousness. And Set was the opposite of that. He was the one that was the tempter. He was the one that would always try to take right action off the path and, put somebody into the selfish, egoic will and, of the ego. And hence he was the one that killed the light at the end of the day. He was the one that, was on the western horizon and going into darkness and into the underworld. So it's all allegorical. And I would say, yes, that's one of the origins, the allegorical lessons that come out of ancient Egypt, Kemet, as it was called, is one of the origins for the whole mythos of Satan in the Christian tradition.
Yeah, and you see that it's almost like it, I know the high priest and the pharaohs pretty much ran, Egypt and then, Greco-Egypt as well. And then you have, when the Roman Empire had started, Augustus Caesar, Julius Caesar, they were all pretty much high priests. And, Augustus Caesar was the first pope. It was almost as if they had chosen to turn the lights off. And that was a government, a religious kind of decision because they were one and the same back in Egypt and I know in Greece and then Rome. And they had chosen to turn the lights off in order to conquer the world and not let people know their true origins, the truth,
Sure.
the light. So that's almost where we get these stories of Osiris, being killed and chopped up into 14 pieces.
Right.
And then we see his phallus, the obelisk now in Rome.
Right.
It's almost like there's a time period set on this, but we'll get into that more. Just go ahead, keep going, Mark.
Sure. So, I became involved in Satanism and I espoused the ideology through writing and music. And at some point, the work that I was doing, without even contacting the Church of Satan, was recognized by Anton LaVey. And he contacted me to appoint me to a priest. He wanted to know if I wanted to be a priest in the Church of Satan because he felt that I had excellent communication skills and kind of wanted me to act as a mouthpiece and espouse the ideology to others and start a grotto, which is what they call covens in Satanism, in this area. I was never really that interested in beginning a grotto because I looked at the ideology as a very personal thing, and I wasn't about really meeting with groups. But him and others sent me contacts in this area, and I was beginning to look into other grottos to see what were the type of people that were members. And I would attend certain grottos, get together with other Satanists in the surrounding area around this region of the country. Generally, it was in Pennsylvania and Maryland, and occasionally Delaware. So those three states. As my involvement in Satanism through attending some of these grotto meetings and rituals grew, I began to become aware that this wasn't just isolated groups of people that were into an ideology and acting on their own, okay, and who just wanted some occult knowledge to understand.
Was this in the 70s or the 80s?
No,
90s?
This was in the 90s.
90s,
this would have been in the mid-1990s.
Okay, great.
Early to mid-90s, I guess you could say, is when it started in the early 90s and, culminated, I guess, in the late 90s. It was throughout the decade of the 90s. And they weren't just about trying to understand some of this knowledge and take on this ideology for their own personal reasons. I mean, many of them were. But many of these groups comprised of an array of powerful people from all walks of life, all institutions, every social institution you could imagine. Politics, banking, there were bankers, there were doctors, people from the media, lawyers, military, law enforcement, I mean, you name it. You name it. High-ranking, influential people from just about every social institution that you could imagine were members of these satanic grottos. And when I started realizing that, and this isn't just some other disillusioned, teenagers and 20-something-year-olds that were, that had found an ideology that they liked, that sounded good to them, because their egos were out of control. These were powerful people that were involved in this, and very influential in their communities.
What would you say would be the main reason? I know you had mentioned you were, fed up with the religious dogmas and so forth. Would you say a lot of the people join for that, or is it more selfish, get-ahead reasons?
Yeah, I would say at the interface level with the public, it is for the reasons of they're wrapped up in their own ego, they want more personal power, and they recognize at some level that what this knowledge ultimately is the knowledge of how to influence other people to get what you want by subtly controlling their mind.
Gotcha.
It's about manipulation. And again, doing that manipulation for completely selfish purposes to try to get one up on other individuals. And that is what drew me to it as well. That's what I wanted at the time. That's the kind of knowledge I was looking for, because altruism and, helping other people and any kind of service to self, well, that was all associated, in my mind with, Christianity and other organized world religions, and that's the thing I wanted to find the polar opposite of, and I did.
Gotcha.
So they were not just working to learn how to influence and gain some little personal advantage in their own lives. What I recognize is that they were not working separately, but were definitely working together toward a common goal. It was like a hive mind, or what I later came to understand that they call a mastermind. When we say the word mastermind, Satanists don't look at that term in the way most people would. We think of that as, hey, a mastermind is one person who's really smart, and they're a planner, and they scheme, and they try to get other people to help them out and get something done. That's not what they consider the mastermind. A mastermind in the Satanic world is a whole bunch of individual consciousnesses coming together and focusing on the same end goal, end result, and that makes that intent. That focused intent coming together makes that happen, because that's a concentration and a direction of energy. And
yeah, it's like alchemy. That's the black magician's way, and then there's the white magician way, which would be pure and love, right?
And going within and working with the individual to transmute the individuated consciousness. Yeah,
gotcha.
So it is a very hive-minded mentality, even though they preach individuality at the higher levels. When you start getting into when it becomes an organized thing in the grotto system. Many Satanists don't even see this level of it because they never become involved. They're never even probably contacted by anyone who's higher up in the institutional bodies of Satanism or the network, and therefore they never see this side of it. So they think it's just an individual ideology. And it is that too, but again, there is an organized side to it. So
yeah, and that's just like any organization, such as, Freemasonry or the Knights Templar and even the government or even any business, they all operate that way. You never know what's going on at the top when you're at the bottom.
Right, exactly. So.
This
was the bottom level of a pyramid structure of a hierarchical network that if you went up that hierarchy, it would feed into yet another pyramid up above. And we can get into what those institutions are in a little bit. But what I recognized very definitely is that their goal collectively was to increase their own power at the expense of everyone else's rights and freedoms. Didn't matter to them who they were hurting, who they were going to step on. And other people's freedom was not considered nothing to them. If us doing this means that somebody else's rights are usurped, well, that's just how it is. Very psychopathic thinking.
Yeah, the end justifies the means.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So the awareness, when it dawned on me finally, that I had become involved, albeit at a low level, with what I would consider an organized religion, another organized religion, that was the opposite of the traditional organized religions that I had grown up around. This realization that not only was it very organized, but it had at its, within its leadership, people from all walks of social institutions at high levels and positions of power and responsibility in the world. And their ideology was, we're going to get our way even if we have to destroy human freedom to do it. So when I started realizing that this, kind of slavery dynamic was involved in this, I started taking a step back from it, because I realized what was really going on is that these low-level groups, these low-level grottos in Satanism, were really operating as a psychological vetting system, is how I put it. It was a psychological filtration system. They were looking for people with certain psychological characteristics and traits. And what I tell people that they were looking for are people with psychopathic tendencies. Maybe not outright psychopaths. If they can get those and get them on board with their program, all the better. But they're looking for people who are borderline psychopathic. In other words, they have tendencies that are pure selfishness, willingness to do anything to other people, even if it means harming them to get what you want, okay? Lack of empathy, lack of compassion, total no care for rights, and that's a big tenet that draws people into Satanism, is that people don't care about what's right, because to a Satanist, what's right is what's good for me, regardless of who is harmed in the process, and what's wrong is what's bad for me. Even if it may be somebody exposing a crime that I'm doing, when I have no right to be taking that action and harming other people in the process. If somebody else is diming me out, so to speak, well, that's a horrible wrong that they're doing because it's being done against me. See, the whole world revolves around me in the Satanic ideology. That's ultimately, again, as I said, what the God is in Satanism. The ego is placed up on the pedestal and basically, quote-unquote, worshipped as a deity. So when I realized that this is what this was all about, I still had the remnants of a conscience. I wouldn't say I really had a conscience at that point. I was borderline psychopathic because of the upbringing that I had. In retrospect, in hindsight, I look back at my own upbringing, and it was very satanic. People don't think of the average American lifestyle as satanic, but it is, because it's all about just do for yourself. Don't worry about what's going on with the world. Don't worry about what's going on with society. Don't worry about what's going on with rights, right and wrong.
Let's touch on that, Mark, because I totally agree with you, because as I had mentioned, I feel like my, early years up, literally until I was, I'd say 35 or so, I lived a satanic life, even though I wasn't a member of the Church of Satan, nor did I even study any of these ideologies. And now that I've gotten out of that lifestyle that was hurting me, of the darkness, the prophets before people, and my needs before anybody else's. Right. I feel like once I got out of that, in the more years I get into knowledge and Gnosticism and learning how the world works and religion, I see literally 99% of the people in America are Satanists, and they don't even know it.
That's right. That is absolutely right. I mean, I literally took a document that was the Tenets of Satanism, of the Satanic ideology, with all of the main points of what the underlying tenets are, to a family member one time, maybe about a year and a half or 2 years ago. It was probably about 2 years now. And I hid the title of the document. I put another strip of paper over the title and hid it. Okay? And the person didn't know that what the whole thing was about was Satanism. And I asked them to basically read the underlying tenets, the overarching tenets of Satanism, without telling them that it was Satanism. And I asked them to just read this, it was like a 2-page document, something like that, with the very broad outlines of the tenets of this ideology. Asked them to read it, and said, "No, what do you think of that?" after they read it. And they said, "I pretty much agree with every single thing that I read there. That's how I think. That's how I basically live my life and make my decisions in my life. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And this is, I would say I agree with it." And I took the piece of paper off over the title, and I said, "This is what you just agreed to. This is what you are saying, that you basically live by and espouse this ideology. This is called Satanism." I said, you've never heard of this talked about as Satanism because, to you, Satanism is, performing ancient rituals with child sacrifice in the woods, and, it's the Hollywood variant of Satanism. But you've never heard of this form of ideological Satanism that is at work in the world. And really that it's the controlling ideology. It's the ideology that's ultimately controlling the world. And they said, and I said, "Well, what do you think of that? That basically what you just read was the main tenets of Satanism, and that this is what the ideology that you consider that you live by, and you're okay, with that, and that, this is something that you espouse, basically." And they said, "I guess that makes me a Satanist, doesn't it?" And they were fine with that. Not one word of, "Oh my God, that's horrible. What am I think? I can't believe that, basically my thoughts are satanic, and, this is how I think. And I didn't know that that's what this really was." It was, the response that came back was, "Well, I guess that makes me a Satanist then, doesn't it?" And that's it.
Yeah, and you could just basically have added on, "I guess that makes me a psychopath that don't give a shit about people."
That's pretty much true. And again, I need to look no further than members of my own family. And I mean, this is a close member of the family, not a distant relative or anything like that. Somebody I've grown up around pretty much my whole life. So, it's everywhere. It's a systemic psychological infection that has really taken over people. And what these lower level grottos and organizations, I really call the organizations like the Church of Satan, the Temple of Set, the Church of Lucifer, etc. You can go on and on with different groups, Order of the Evil Eye, etc. I call these mini-me Satanism, because there's a bigger satanic hierarchy out there than just at the level of interface with the public. The interface with the public, I call it mini-me Satanism. It's like, what they're really trying to do is psychologically vet people. They're trying to psychologically filter people through this system. So they do a profiling, psychological profiling, where they're trying to find out as much as possible about the way someone thinks. But not only that, if they find people that have these psychological characteristics, which are psychopathic, or secondarily psychopathic, or at least have psychopathic tendencies, what they're trying to do is identify out of those people that have that kind of a mindset, people with specific skill sets. They're looking for psychopathic people with specific skill sets that they could then work with and groom up through the ranks. So again, this is a filtration and vetting system, where if they think you have the right stuff that they're looking for, they're going to bring you up through their ranks and take you up into higher levels of the network.
Sounds like the government.
It's a grooming. It's a grooming program, essentially.
Gotcha.
So, again, these smaller orders interface with the public. They attempt to locate people with these personality traits and then groom them up into the larger network of dark occultism in general. And they groom these people for positions of placement, placement into positions of power, I should say. That's what they're being groomed for, within the social institutions, so that they can keep this going.
and they can influence the most amount of people with their magic.
Exactly. They're
Gotcha.
So they can keep the control system perpetuated. Right.
And what a lot of people don't know is our words, our voice, music, that's all magic, and that's what these people are looking for, such as yourself. You speak eloquently, Mark. I've always known that about you. You're very intelligent, and it comes through when you talk. So obviously, Anton LaVey seeking you out to be a priest for the Church of Satan, they're smart. They want to get fellow smart people that can influence other people. So it's just recruiting.
Yeah, they immediately identify the skill set. They do this through an extensive interview process if you're basically going in to become a priest in the organization. So they really did a psychological workup, a psychological eval upon me, guaranteed.
Which I assume the top echelons of the military and certain things in government do the same thing, because if you're not willing to go along with the program and you have a conscience and you have morals and ethics that are contrary to the ends justifies the means, then you're going to be a problem, so they don't even bother with you.
That's exactly right. You won't even make it up into the higher echelons of those organizations. Yep.
Gotcha.
So when I realized that this is how I was being used at this point, again, I still had a shred of a conscience. It may have been a very thin slice of one, but it was still there enough for me to say, slavery is not what I'm about. You're not going to be no one's bitch, even if it's the Church of Satan, right? Exactly. And I didn't want to see other people around me enslaved either. Competition was one thing, but enslavement was altogether different in my mind. And, they seemed to have no problem with that, but I had a big problem with it. So, my conscience wouldn't allow me to proceed, and I started pulling away from any continued affiliations. And people say, well, what was the reaction to that? Did they threaten you? Did they want to kill you? The reaction to this was as if I did not exist. It was like, okay, punk, out the door, and don't let it hit you in the ass on the way out, and good luck. Just like that. It was like so nonchalant, and you think we need you for what we're doing? That's it.
Mark, I want to disclose as well, I'm not going to say the organization, but some of the most powerful organizations I'd say in the world I was looked at to be a member, because I'm really good on the internet. I'm a webmaster. I know how to make a website rank. I know how to get traffic, and I know how to do several things that I feel that I was being looked at by these organizations because I had asked to join, and they were looking at me where any other person with my background, they would have said, no way.
Right.
And I think they were doing a psychological profile on me the whole time, and then after about a year or two, I was pretty much cut off and just basically ignored and defriended and de-LinkedIn, and and I was just basically, I'm on my own. You're just a slave. You'll never be one of us, and just good luck.
That's their attitude.
Gotcha.
And basically their attitude was, and if you think you're going to go and inform other people about what's really going on or what you perceive is really going on, good luck with that too, because we have their minds so perfectly controlled that you'll be banging your head against a wall forever. And in a lot of ways, I wish I could say that they were completely wrong regarding that, but I can't really make that statement, because regarding what they told me about the extent that they have control over the people's minds of this planet, they were telling me the truth.
I agree, Mark.
Unfortunately, I don't want that to be the truth, but it is.
And what I look at, Mark, even though we know this is the truth, we're willing to step out there to get those few people in between that we can.
Right.
And I think that's where we're able to sleep at night, and we know that when we die, we might not go to that dark place that these people are going to go to.
Sure. Well, I have if you would like to take it in this direction, I have a proposal. We were talking about the tenets of Satanism, okay? And I said I would expand on them a little bit for people so that they know what they are. I have some new results that I have not even put out there yet. I just finished the natural law seminar, the first ever natural law seminar here in Philadelphia. It went great, actually better than I expected. and that took place between June and July here, from about mid-June till the end of this month. And we did some very interesting psychological experiments that were homework assignments as part of the seminar. And I'm probably going to do a couple of podcasts, at least one, where I'm going to present these results. But I could debut this right here if you want to talk about some of them, because we could these prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that people have the ideology of Satanism, that they have taken it on by the questions that I asked in some of these homework assignments and the responses that we got back. And I'll just...
I'd love for you if you could, Mark.
Yeah, I'll just briefly explain what we did. Each week, after the topic was presented for that week of the seminar, topics, I should say, I presented the class with a homework assignment. They would take a questionnaire form, and they would have to find just random people, okay, not immediate family members, that they live with, but just people in their lives or even random strangers. It didn't really matter. And just ask them some simple questions that could be answered, with multiple choice or true or false, just to see where their mentality was and how they are thinking. And then they would bring the results back, and I would tabulate them, and I, made charts and pie charts and everything to try to analyze the data. But we did one experiment where we asked people what they want the most in life, the things that they want the most in life. It could be anything. And I was just trying to find out, who would say freedom, who would say truth, who would say knowledge, who would say wisdom, or who would say justice, or who would say, I want a bigger house, I want a faster car, I want a bigger bank account, I want more money, I want a better job, I want fancier clothes, etc.
And Mark, these people are people who follow you and who we'd say have knowledge and are enlightened a little bit, correct?
Oh, no, well, the people who are asking the questions to others, yes. And see, that also, though, would skew these results. In my opinion, the results would be skewed slightly to the positive just because you have conscious individuals in the class who are doing the homework assignment, who are taking those questions to other people. All right?
Okay.
They're not the ones answering the question, the students of the seminar. They're not the ones answering it.
Gotcha.
They're taking the questions and asking it to other people, whether it be, family members who aren't immediate in their house family members. I disqualified those because, again, that they could be very influenced by the student if they're immediate family members. So I said family members, but not immediate, or random strangers, even friends, whatever. So when the results came back, I just wanted to see how many people would say specific things to gauge where their mindset is at. How many people wanted things for themselves versus how many things wanted things for the world at large in general, okay? So you had people coming back with things like power. You had certain people would say happiness. A lot of people said their personal happiness. Some people would say safety. Some said health. Some said they want a family. They want to raise children. Some said, I want more personal possessions. A lot of people said, I want a better house, a better car, personal relationships, money. So it was a wide array of responses. When I tabulated all of the responses and then said, I basically grouped all the responses into two categories. One was selfish responses. In other words, the response was of what they desired the most in life. The response was about service to self and had nothing to do with the world at large. It had nothing to do with humanity. It even had nothing to do with values in general, like wisdom or knowledge or anything like that. It was purely self-motivated interest. In other words, what you would call service to self modalities, versus the percentage of people that would say things like wisdom or truth or knowledge or freedom that were not self-centered motivations, that were what I would call service to others or service to values modalities. And I'll let you take a guess. What do you think the percentage was of total responses from all the respondents of this question, all right, which was, I guess, almost 100 people, of what was the percentage, the ratio of service to self versus service to others or service to values in general?
I'd say 90%.
You're very close. It was about 85%. 85% of people had the service to self mentality. And only about 15% answered with their response what you can consider service to others or service to values consciousness. That's where we're at. And I would say that was a highly accurate result. And again, maybe it's a slightly positively skewed result just by nature of the type of people who were involved in the cross section of people who were asking the questions. So this is about who is focused only on me, versus how many people are focused on something that goes a little bit beyond the self, with a lowercase s, the ego-driven self. And you can see this is where people are at. Now, the first tenet of Satanism is that the self comes before everything else in creation. That's the very first tenet. The number one law, if there is any laws in Satanism, is called self-preservation is the highest law. That's it. The number one tenet or law of Satanism is serve the self above everything else. That's how you could encapsulate that tenet. The self must come before everything else. Okay, so, and don't get me wrong, folks, I'm not a collectivist. I'm not saying put individual rights on the back burner when it comes to the collective. What I'm talking about here is the ego run amok. Okay, the ego out of control and only focus on what you want, and you're not focused on values like truth.
And that's how the powers that be play word plays. It's like when you say you're not part of the collective, you're part of the betterment of humanity, and let's do the best for the world at large. But you're also not going to give up your own independent rights for someone else who doesn't have the same ideologies as you, kind of thing, right?
Exactly. There needs to be a perfect blending between those two things. In other words, I fully espouse the natural law rights of the individual, which are based in morality, which are based on the laws of morality, the differences between right and wrong. That's why we call them rights. They're not wrongs. That's the entire crux of what I talk about goes to rights. But at the same time, if somebody is so out of control in selfishness, then the world is going to become completely dog-eat-dog, which it has become. That's not human nature. Again, these social engineers that are often dark occultists, they want you to think that that's what human nature is. Human nature isn't that dog-eat-dog mentality. This is what has become the human condition because of the programming that people have been put through. Again, the real human nature is that human beings are programmable. And the kinds of conditions that we're around and the kinds of ideas that we take in program the human body, mind, computer, and then it behaves and performs certain functions. And we get an output on the screen called life that is a certain way. And right now I would suggest it's a way that we don't wish it to be, most of us anyway, because we've fallen into this completely pure, selfish, self-serving, self-preservation is the highest law mindset.
Yeah, and when you look at that, Mark, as a collective, that's the mindset of most, of course, the Western world right now, and it seems like it's spreading. But the solution, when you look at it, is just kind of like what you did, kind of like what I did, and I'm sure you're doing maybe with your family if you can. I don't know if you're single, married, or whatever. I have kids. I have a wife and I have kids, where I'm working on myself and then I'm spreading it to my immediate close ones, which would be my family, my wife, and my kids, and that's how the solution starts. It starts with us individually, and then it works out from there.
That's exactly right. The real power is in one, because the ultimately change in consciousness has to be made at the level of the individual. Then that change has to be pulled together in the aggregate by changing individuals, and then as more individuals change, you'll see an aggregate change in society.
And that's what's so great about the internet, where probably in your own town, Mark, it's hard to, well, I know you're doing seminars and you're finding people such as yourself and they're driving to Philadelphia or whatever, but with the internet, we're able to connect with people all around the world and create this kind of hive mind. And I almost see us podcasters and people that are in the alternative truth movement and helping wake people up, we're almost networking and creating that hive as well.
Yes, it is absolutely about creating that neural network that is called a mastermind. It is the same thing these dark occultists do, except we're going to propagate the values of individuality and truth and knowledge and wisdom. That's ultimately what it's about.
Yeah, it's a religion of Horus, of light and truth.
That's right.
We're here to bring Horus back.
Yeah, I would call it true religion. That's what I would call it, as opposed to the false religion that holds us back. The other etymological root meaning of the word religion means to reunite with. And therefore, what are we going to reunite with? We're going to reunite with truth itself.
Let's talk about this, Mark. There's the saying, the ends justifies the means. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I like to look at the darkness and try to find goodness in it. Is there a reason why our world has been set up the way it has been? And, we're inherently selfish animals, human beings are, and they use basically our own, human psychology to work against us to get what they need, which I believe is building Solomon's Temple, which would be kind of a worldwide control grid where they're not going to lose their power no matter what. And part of this magic of Satanism was to do that. And we're pretty much at the end of that era because Solomon Temple is built. We're here on the web. You don't surf it, you get caught on it in the web, right? So my thoughts are, the powers that be understand this, and the goal wasn't always to have darkness and the world ruled by Set and money and selfishness, and that one day we were to have Horus and the age of Osiris and so forth. Do you think that's true, or we're always going to be ruled by this darkness and selfishness?
No, I do not believe that this is an eternal condition. I think that this condition can be changed at any time that humanity wills to change it. And that
so it's up to us.
The dawning when we start to align our will with the will of creation, that will be the dawning of that age of Horus.
And do you think that the powers that be understand this, and they're letting people such as yourself, myself, and of course others out there spread the light? And since we're not, on corporate news or whatever, they're going to allow us to do that? Because
I would say that they don't like that is happening, and really would prefer to shut that down if they could. But I think Pandora's box has been opened, and I'm not quite so sure. I don't think that they can envision every single thing that is possible. I don't think these are all-powerful people like gods. These are just psychopathic people with an out-of-control ego that want to serve themselves and put everybody else in a cage if they have to do it to serve themselves.
And that would be the result of the powers that be warring with one another. And if you look over the past 3,000 years with the fall and rise of the various empires and the races and the just people disappearing, it seems like in the background the whole time, while we're being selfish humans, going after the American dollar and the American dream and getting our house and everything, that we're helping them build their power structure to enslave us.
That's right. And ultimately to destroy us. Because this cycle of destruction is going to keep happening until we learn the lesson and come out of the mode of consciousness that allows it to perpetuate. And that mode of consciousness is Satanism. This is what has to be conquered within the individual. It's the force that divides the individual consciousness against itself, so that it cannot actually learn the boundary conditions of the laws of the universe and align its will with those laws, which is what natural law is all about. And if they can keep us ignorant of those things, we are going to continue to be controlled very easily. As a matter of fact, it's child's play for them to do what they are doing. But I don't think that means that they are happy or want to see information like this coming out into the open. They want to keep that information as close to their chest as possible and as hidden as possible. Now they know it's not hidden anymore. They know that since the floodgates have opened with the internet, occulted information is no longer hidden. What they are doing is adding so much noise to the signal that they're hoping to deflect people away from looking into it, to dissuade them from looking into it and say, oh no, there's nothing there, you don't want to look into that. Religion plays a big role in this too, organized religion, because many people, when they hear the word occult, they don't understand that just means hidden. It comes from the Latin occultus, from the verb occultare.
And people think it's evil or dark when it's just hidden.
Exactly. And we did an experiment with that to see how many people knew the meaning of the word occult. And only 10% of people got the meaning right. 90% of human beings don't know what the word occult really means. They believe in the connotative it's not a definition, the connotative accepted colloquial meaning of occult, which is evil, bad, sorcery, witchcraft, etc.
Yeah, and if you look at these numbers, it just goes back to 90% of the people just do not think for themselves or study or find knowledge themselves. I could show you some really great results from some of these homework assignments that prove that people will not look at information. I mean, there's a couple of them I'd really like to go over because it shows the mindset that people are in and what really needs to be conquered. This mindset of refusal to look into something for oneself needs to be conquered. The mindset of a selfishness, the mindset of moral relativism. Let's look at a couple other of these results that we got from the natural law homework assignments. And again, I'll probably be doing a podcast with all of these, putting all the results out there for people to check out. One of the questions that we asked is truth objective or subjective? In other words, is the way things are not really dependent on what an individual perceives? Or does perception equal reality? So in other words, is there objective truth? Is there truth that can be known if we discover it? And it's not based on how a person thinks or believes at any given time. It's just, that's what is. Or is truth subjective? Is it totally relative? Is it based on perception? And it will change. If two people see it differently, well, there's one thing is the truth for him and one thing is the truth for the other person. Now, take a guess what this broke down to, percentage-wise. So the overarching question is truth objective or is truth subjective? 90 again, 85.
No, we're not in that bad of a situation yet.
Okay.
It was about 40-60, with 60% of people believing that truth is subjective. Now, that's unbelievably horrifying, even at that number. Because that means 60%, almost 2 out of 3 people, believe that truth is subjective and essentially everything is relative, and that is borderline solipsism. That's like saying, well, then can truth ever really be known if it's only based in perception? And, there's no actual objective truth. Now, if there's no actual objective truth, then there can't be any actual objective rights.
So it's almost like that's part of propaganda, would be telling half-truths. So it's almost like this is getting ingrained into people's psyches to accept half-truths as truths, and they're subjective, and everything is a half-truth.
The idea that one can never really know. You can never really arrive at truth, meaning there's no such thing as knowledge. And again, if you look at Satanism, it has a concept called the Satanic sins. Yes, there are sins in Satanism. There are sins for the Satanist. But each one of the sins are what the Satanist wants to propagate to the masses of people. So in other words, they're sins only for them. That really needs to be understood, is that what they consider sins are not sins for everyone. It's sins for the Satanists only. But then what you want to do is try to get everybody else in that mode of thinking. The first of them is stupidity. So the Satanist doesn't, it looks at the ultimate wrongdoing for the Satanist themselves is to not be aware of what's going on. Okay, but they want the public to be in that condition so they're more easily manipulated. So you want to try to propagate stupidity as much as possible, but of course never take that on yourself. And then another tenet, another sin, one of the satanic sins, is solipsism. This is an ideology most people have never even heard of. It basically means that there is no such thing as truth. And a Satanist considers solipsism as a sin to them. But they want other people to take on solipsism, because taking on solipsism will keep you stupid, which is where they want
so if you're not part of the gang, then screw you.
Right.
You get what you deserve.
In other words,
gotcha.
if for someone to think that there's no such thing as knowledge or objective reality to be known, they'll never try to search for truth. And therefore, they'll never really know anything, and they'll be stupid forever. And that's where they want people, because that's where people can be manipulated when they don't have knowledge. Especially knowledge of what's going on with the human psyche and the methodologies of manipulation that can be used against the psyche. Here's another great example of where people's mindset is totally trapped in Satanism. We asked people, are right and wrong objective or subjective? So, are right and wrong, do they exist independently from human perception? Are they not simply concepts that are made up by human beings, but they are something that are inherent, that are self-existing? Or are these just random concepts made up by human beings that are entirely dependent on perception, and if perception changes, right and wrong can change with the perception? That was one of the questions. You want to take a guess at the breakdown there?
70-30.
You're very close. It was about 67 to 33. So over 2/3 of people are moral relativists. 2 out of 3 people believe that right and wrong are subjective and based entirely in perception, and if perception changes, right and wrong can change. That there is no such thing as objective morality.
Unbelievable.
Now, there's a law in natural law. And I would say you can encapsulate almost all of natural law in this way. I call it the law of freedom. That's what I've started calling it very recently. And it's a mathematical equation. As morality increases, freedom increases. As morality decreases, freedom decreases. So what is morality? Morality is aligning one's behavior with right action over wrong action once you have acquired the knowledge of the difference between those two things, which is called conscience. So morality is aligning one's behavior with conscience, the knowledge of the objective difference between right and wrong. And 2/3 of people believe that those things are completely relative. Basically, there's no such thing as right and wrong inherently. We get to make it up. That's what moral relativism is. That's Satanism. That is the fundamental tenet, the second fundamental tenet of Satanism is moral relativism. And 2 out of every 3 people, according to this, it's just, these are randomly gathered results, not a gigantic, portion of the population, obviously. We don't have a huge sampling, but I would suggest if you did have a gigantic sampling, that the results wouldn't wander terribly from these results.
I agree, Mark. I mean, it's common sense to people such as yourself and myself, but these numbers help back up what we already think in our minds. Because I know you're probably like me. We experience these people everywhere we go in the world, not maybe on our blogs or our podcasts, but out in society. And I don't like to go out and deal with these people 99% of the time unless I have to. And I assume you're probably quite the same, Mark.
Oh, it's becoming to a very bad extent. A lot of what's propagated in the so-called spiritual community is that as you become more aware, you should be able to tolerate more people's insanity. I don't find that true whatsoever. I find myself going in the exact opposite direction, that I have a lower and lower tolerance for human stupidity and human immorality, most of all, and human apathy. So people not knowing, not caring, and ultimately remaining lazy and apathetic, my tolerance for that it wanes almost exponentially as time goes on. I don't think that means that I'm not spiritually awake or aware. I think that's a very New Age notion that this should be put up with, quote unquote.
And we should all love each other and have a love fest no matter what.
Right. Instead of that we really need to be going to work explaining to people, hey, you are morally wrong. You are supporting something that is driving the human species deeper and deeper into slavery. And it's not okay. And trying to help influence them to change their modes of thinking. People have to understand there cannot be. It is a law existing in the universe. It is a boundary condition of creation. There cannot be freedom in a society that embraces moral relativism. Those two things are so intertwined and go hand in hand. It's like trying to say, I can pour water all over this shirt and it will remain dry. Well, good luck with that. That will never happen. There is a law that if you wet a piece of clothing, it's going to be saturated with liquid, and that's called wet, and you can't make it dry by doing that. If you want to cool something off, you don't put it over an open flame, because that heats it up. You can't use the opposite polarity to get the opposite polarity. Okay? So you can't be morally relativistic and achieve freedom, because freedom is based in knowing the difference between right and wrong, and then actually choosing right over wrong, and then people will be free. You can't do that. It's not possible to do that at all if your ideology is one of moral relativism. It isn't possible. So as long as we have a society where at least, and again, I would suggest maybe these results are, again, a bit skewed toward the positive. Maybe it is. Maybe you're more correct that it is 70-30, or maybe even worse. But 2/3 at least of people believe in moral relativism. And this is the second overarching tenet, the main ideological tenet of Satanism. Right there. So those are a few results, I just wanted to bring it up as showing people as an example This is where people's mindset is at. And this is what we have to understand to know the why regarding why we're in this situation. We know the who, what, when, where, and how, but what's the most important is to understand the why. And those are the psychological factors at work in the minds of the people of our society. And it's bad. It's a very, very bad dynamic that is taking place, and it needs a whole lot of change and a whole lot of healing, and we need a lot more people doing that great work of trying to influence that change back to the truth.
Is there another reason why our world is ruled, by Satan, and it seems like the powers that be have chosen, this method to govern us? Is there a reason other than building the pyramid and keeping people, out of the light and out of knowledge, and to basically enslave them with their own desires and selfish needs and so forth? Is there another goal possibly being played here on people with their souls?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to ask you, and I'm not sure if you get into this too much. So one of my things that I believe is, we're immortal beings, and when we live this way, how we're not supposed to live, in love and acceptance and with natural law, and we live contrary to it, that we're actually causing us to be mortal, and we basically are changing the whole alchemical makeup of our energies, which were made of stardust. Right. And like, Einstein says, everything is energy, and that's all there is to it, and that would include us humans. So when I think about it, it's basically they're turning us into these dark orb energies that when we die, we're basically going to be caught in wherever, in hell. So can you expand on that a little bit?
I look at it very much as these beings who are in human form that are controlling this control system are ultimately inhabited. There's higher dimensional consciousnesses that feed off of human souls. We're food for another type of species of being at some level. And they want to keep us in this low vibratory frequency by which we're not developing the higher forms of the self, by which we're not developing the soul, essentially. See, people think, we have a soul already. Well, what if the case is that you need to build the soul before really having it? That needs to be built up first. That it's not just a default condition. And that our work here is to build the soul. And as long as we don't, we remain food, because that lower frequency is very palatable to these entities, for lack of a better term.
Gotcha.
And
so if we were to die
and actually start to do that soul work, they don't feed off of that higher frequency anymore.
Okay, so that was another question I was going to get into, because I know there's a lot of people out there, when they think of Satanism, they think of, black magic, dark rituals and stuff that are played upon people where, say a group of Satanists get together and they want to psychologically attack someone, they can, just with their hive mind mentality, if that person's weak and is not awakened and enlightened, or whatever you might say.
They will gather and put on a psychodramatic ritual geared toward destruction, to send destructive energy from the mastermind of the hive mind, if you will, of the grotto, toward that individual. But then they will not stop there. They will actually take physical action in the world to try to do something negative to the person, whether it be something directly physical or something like, let's get him involved in a sex scandal, and that destroys his business or his credibility. Let's get him involved in a financial scandal, and he, loses all credibility and spends a year in jail. So they'll try to affect things in the physical world regarding that aim as well. They won't just do it energetically. But sometimes
the end justifies the means.
Right. But sometimes it will be just an energetic casting of energy. They very much believe in that.
And people, I would assume, such as yourself, you might have been possibly the target, even though you were pretty much cut off from, the Church of Satan, and it's just like they don't know you anymore, but you could have been a target of these as well, and I assume you educate a lot of people that you're not a favorite of theirs.
Yeah, I would probably say that they're very unhappy with what I'm attempting to do, but at the same time, I would say they're probably not worried in the slightest bit.
And that goes along to your stats that you had at your natural law seminar.
Yeah, they don't like losing someone. In other words, they don't really like that. But it's like it's no skin off their back until people really start listening to someone. And based on the numbers I just communicated, we're nowhere near a turnaround. Not even close. The people who think that the world is waking up and there's such an enormous enlightenment taking place. Spiritual enlightenment is taking place in paltry, small, very, very, very fragmented numbers. For it to go quantum, for it to actually go critical mass, the amount of numbers that we need. See, this whole new agey idea of, it's going to take a little bit of people because, their energy is so much more powerful than the unconscious people. No, it's about numbers. It's all about numbers. It always has been all about numbers.
And we got to do our work, just like
right.
The Church of Satan or the other organizations recruit people who are talented and can influence people, whether that be with their work, their words, or their music. It has to be the same way with us.
That's right, because this evil agenda is working nonstop. All the people who are giving their energy over to it, serving that system for a paycheck, serving that system for security, they're all actively in there, and the gears of this great machine are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, nonstop. And that's how we have to be. If we're going to really do the great work, when I say the great work I want people to understand what that means. The true great light work. Okay? The real great work involves helping other people to change their mind. And this is why so few people want to do this work. You have to know how natural law functions to such an extent that you can communicate it effectively to others. You have to understand the dynamic of what's happening around us to such an extent that you can effectively communicate it and get people to understand it. You have to have such a strong willpower that you will be willing to work with people over and over and over and over again over an extended period of time to help them come out of their brainwashing and mind control and to get them to see the truth and to get them to see the light. Most people, when they hear that's what our work really is, a lot of people don't believe that's what the great work is. They don't believe that we need to do that. They believe we need to just worry about ourselves, and if we know what's going on, then that's it, and my work is done here. And I'm here to tell you that is 100% false. That is a New Age falsity that is put there by the very people who do not want people doing the real great work. The real great work is sitting down with that person who just told you that they're comfortable with adopting a satanic ideology mindset. And, that must mean I'm a Satanist. And non-stop hammering on them over a period of years to break down that mindset until they can see the light and help to start to rebuild their own consciousness.
And most people aren't willing to do
right.
that.
They want nothing to do with that work whatsoever.
And that's why there will always be only a few Marks and, Mo's out there and, Henrik Palmgren, Red Ice Creations, and all the other great podcasters and people who spread the light. There's only going to be a few.
People believe that the truth is just magically going to come to people. The truth itself is always going to exist. But don't confuse that with thinking that it has a voice in our world through anything but us. The truth is there. It's up to people to receive it, but then once it's received, to speak it to other people. Because we're the vehicles. We are the vehicles by which the truth propagates itself in the world. It doesn't just happen automatically by itself. No voice comes out of the sky and says, here's everything you need to know. People have to do that work.
Definitely. Seek and you shall find.
Exactly. You know, people have to understand that this is going to take courage and persistence. They have to get out of their shell, of their timidness. You know, they have to stop worrying about, oh, can I communicate this effectively and you know, do it just right? And, you know, they're worried about failing too much. If you generally know what's going on, you need to start speaking it now. I beat myself up over this personally still sometimes because I waited so long. I knew what I know now a few years before I started talking about it. And I waited for I would say 3 to 4 years probably before I actually began, because I so wanted to, you know, make sure I had it right and I wasn't going to do any harm by putting it out there. I give people the advice, if you're even partially on the path, start telling people what you're sure of.
I agree. That was 4 years almost wasted when you look back, right, Mark?
Until someone shook me out of that. You know, it took one person to say some semi-harsh, almost vitriolic words to me that shook me out of that mindset. And I said, yeah, what am I doing? I'm sitting on all of this, doing nothing, when I should be out there engaging other human beings with this.
Is that when you started whatonearthishappening.com?
Yes, exactly.
And how long have you been operating that website?
I put that up in early 2008. I actually began speaking publicly in 2007.
Okay. So you've been at this a while, and I'd say your website, it's a great website. You have everything simply archived. Did you go to college, Mark?
I did. I attended the University of Pennsylvania.
Okay. Yeah, you just you definitely have everything easy to find. You go to your resources, everything's alphabetical. You could basically click on the different links. You have the people, you have the different words that we've been talking about, from alchemy to Amun-Ra, the apocalypse, Babylon. I mean, just a wealth of information. Do you do this pretty much every day, 7 days a week, 7 days a week? What else do you do besides this?
Well, besides public speaking and doing a podcast and basically operating 2 websites, for some Federal Reserve notes to purchase food, I will also do computer technical work. I'll do computer repair, computer tutoring, things like that. So I'll also tutor design skills, presentation skills, things like that. So that's how I basically procure the fake version of money so that I can eat. But again, I eke out a very meager living through that process. Really, I consider myself a teacher of this information, and that's really what I consider my work is full-time.
Yeah, and I know, Mark, I've talked to a lot of guys such as yourself and people who are in this arena that educate people, and they're always doing a few different things to survive in order to live in this system where money rules us. And, we have to do what we have to do as long as it is within the natural law, our morals, and our ethics, and it seems like you've found that, and that's what I love about what you're doing. You go to your website, everything's free, but you have your seminars, which of course I agree you should charge for those, and if people don't want to go, they don't have to go, but
sure.
If they want to meet with you and network with other people, I think that's a great way to do so. And I mean, I look at your seminars, and you're actually really, really putting these on with a lot of information and planning and after planning. So it's not just like one seminar here, I'm going to make some money. You're actually putting a lot more work than I see anybody doing. It's not like, hey, I'm Mark, come see me, pay me $100 or whatever. you're actually going above and beyond, and you're providing value for these seminars. And it would be
this first natural law seminar, this six-week project that I put together, was one of the hardest things that I've ever done personally. It was so much work, but it was so worth it at the same time. Again, it definitely surpassed my expectations. I'm going to have to put another one together soon, maybe in the late fall or early winter, and I'm looking into the possibilities and the technology of doing one online. I don't know how, how effective that will be without actually meeting people in person and engaging them in person. But if I could find some technology that would facilitate something like that, like a webinar, I know there's many different webinar programs out there. But I'm going to look into the feasibility of that, because a lot of people have been asking me from other regions of the country and other countries, because they obviously can't attend here in Philadelphia. But I think I'll probably do both. I'll look into making other physical seminars here in Philly and doing some online webinars.
I think you should, Mark, because, I would definitely, I can't afford to travel to Philadelphia and to see you or go to these seminars, but I would be happy to pay X amount of dollars to see this online. Even if it wasn't streaming, if you had some type of archive seminar, I think you would have a tremendous amount of people such as myself around the world that can't afford or make it to these, to Philadelphia, will definitely pay to see you on video, because we know, if we know who you are, we know that you put a lot of work into your stuff. And this is just an example of that. I mean, a full 6-class seminar, that you did in person, if you were to do that on video, I would buy it, So please look into doing that in the future.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to take that under advisement, and probably will be doing that sometime in the very near future.
Great. And for the listeners out there, you could find Mark at whatonearthishappening.com. What is your other website that you operate?
The other website is freeyourmindconference.com, a conference that I've co-hosted 2 times here in Philadelphia, once in 2011, once in 2013, and you could check that out at freeyourmindconference.com.
Great. And how did that go? I know when I originally contacted to interview you, you were putting that on, and again, it was like, I think it was about 6 weeks before, and you're like, no, I'm busy, I'm preparing for my conference.
Yeah, I remember that. That was a rough time. Things were really getting hectic during that time, but I'll tell you what, it was the single greatest achievement that I feel I've accomplished in my life. That second Free Your Mind conference was so powerful. The energy that was in that building for those 3 days, just a phenomenal experience, and it could not have gone any better. That's the only way I could sum it up.
You going to do it again, Mark?
I am looking to get out of the conference organization game. I would like to really focus on the content that I teach to people, and I would love to speak at the third Free Your Mind conference, but I am looking into the possibility of handing off the organizational duties to someone who wants to take this to an even bigger level.
Yeah, because that's more marketing and administrative, and it takes away from you teaching, right?
Yes.
So that's only natural, Mark, and that's why you were so busy. You were basically wearing 15 hats, and then you were on top of that putting on your own, slides and shows for people to watch.
It was overkill. I mean, I took on a little too much at that point, but hey, at the same time, I wouldn't have traded that for anything either, because of how it went. The outcome, it was absolutely worth it. But for a third one, I'm going to stand firm and say I'm not going to organize personally a third one. But I want to work with other individuals to hand this project to someone who I feel can take it in trust and put on a third one and maybe even outdo the first 2. And I would be honored to come and speak at it and put some other information out there for people. But for as far as organization, I think this is that's my last conference to organize.
And maybe who knows? I'll look into that, because I'm just starting out. In doing this, I've operated Gnostic Warrior for the past 8 months. And I was one of those guys like yourself that sat on the sidelines for 4 years listening to Mark Mark on whatonearthishappening.com and the various other podcasters out there, kind of not feeling I had the knowledge to go out on my own. So I feel like I wasted some of those years, and then I don't have experience at any of these conferences. So maybe I could help out in doing that and help promote it. But let me look into it, and we'll talk more
when the
in
existing
the future.
Organizers sit down and decide how we're going to hand this off. I will definitely keep you in mind in that process, and I'll put you in touch with some of those individuals.
Great. I appreciate that, Mark. And what is next for you? Where can we find you besides your website? What can we find next from you?
Let's see. I am going to be speaking at a few different events. I'll be speaking in Gwynedd Township, Pennsylvania, at the Gwynedd Friends Meeting House, a Quaker meeting house in Pennsylvania, just outside of Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, I believe it is. And that's coming up this Sunday, August 4th, at 4 p.m. You can get more about it on my website. It's in the left-hand column under latest news. It's also in the news section. I'm also going to be speaking at I'm going to be speaking in Connecticut. I don't have the details in front of me, but it's if you give me a moment, I could pull it up here.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm going to be in.
And if people want you to speak at their conference or anything like that, you do have a fee schedule, and they just need to contact you for that, and it all depends on where it is and stuff like that, Mark?
I don't even demand a fee or a stipend for speaking. I will come to someone's conference for travel, hotel expenses, and if a stipend is offered, I will accept it, of course, but I'll come and speak at someone's event for free, basically, as long as they take care of my travel and hotel arrangements. But
gotcha.
Yeah, here it is. I'm going to be speaking at in New Haven, Connecticut, at the Omni Hotel on Saturday, October 19th. Saturday, October 19th. That's going to be an all-day seminar. So it'll be an 8-hour event approximately. Tickets are $20 to attend, and I'll have more about that on my website very, very shortly. Also, I'm going to be at, I'll pull up this document quickly, I'm going to be speaking at the Breakthrough Energy Movement Conference. The Breakthrough Energy Movement, you could check that out at Global BEM. globalbem.com. That stands for Breakthrough Energy Movement. I'll be speaking along with many other speakers. I mean, great speakers on this. Foster Gamble's going to be speaking. We have Michael Tellinger. I'm really excited about speaking with him. He's a great researcher.
Yeah, he's a great speaker too,
yep.
Just like yourself.
Who else? Randy Powell's going to be there. Tom Vallone, Russell Anderson, just awesome speakers lined up for that. This is going to be on. I'm trying to get the date. Pull the date up here. October 10th through 12th at the University of Colorado in Boulder, Colorado. So I will be one of the speakers. I believe I'm speaking on the 12th, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that. Don't hold me to that. I will be getting all the information up on my site shortly about that as well. So those are the speaking engagements that I have coming up.
Okay, great. And again, listeners, you can find Mark at whatonearthishappening.com. Most of the things and items we discussed today are on his website. He has podcasts, 143 episodes that are for free to download, and he documents them perfectly, and the topics discussed, images, everything, related video, you could find there. Probably one of the best resource websites in the truth movement that I've ever found, and it's put together so simply but so thoroughly. And
I really appreciate that, Mo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart, because I consider myself somewhat of a webmaster, and you've done an awesome job, and I highly recommend that you check out Mark's work if you want to know what's going on with the world, what on earth is really happening. Check out his website. And Mark, it's been great talking to you for the first time. I hope to talk to you in the next few months again, and we could discuss some other items and things that you're doing.
Absolutely, I would love to. Mo, thanks so much for having me on today.
All right, brother. Take care.
Great. You take care too. Bye-bye.
Bye.